my presentation. Here we go. You should be able to see my screen. I'm just going to present. So yeah, I know there's a lot of you on the call right now. So instead of kind of going around and introducing everyone, which I wish I could do, but I also acknowledge that we only have an hour and we're all on like so many Zoom calls. So if you can chat in some of this information, so your name, pronouns are already kind of in your name for Zoom. But if you can chat in your college, where you're joining from, if it's a different location from your college, why you decided to become a PANYS student organizer, and maybe one thing you'd like to learn about digital organizing. Be super helpful for me just to get to know you all. Just give it a second. Yes. So yeah, why you're interested in Peace Action New York State, if you're not like a student, like one of the student organizers, yeah, just like why you're interested in Peace Action, why you're chapter members, etc. Great. Personal engagement online, increase participation numbers, for sure. Yeah, I think that is a lot, something that a lot can relate to. Social media connections more personal, increasing engagement, increased attendance to Zoom meetings, organize against climate change. Awesome. Awesome. Keep the responses coming in. Love this. Appeal to our members and keep our action strong. So with the craziness, yeah, that's something I definitely relate to. Just cutting through all of the craziness and having people still care. Encourage engagement and participation without having people feel targeted or placed on the spot. For sure. Cool. Well, in the meantime, I'm going to introduce myself as well. Keep chatting in your responses and I'll keep an eye out. But yeah, so as Emily and Desiree mentioned, I'm currently with Beyond the Bomb and Global Zero, and I manage all of their digital actions. So I basically manage like the social media accounts for both brands. I manage email and website, and really anything that's online is kind of what I do. As Emily mentioned, I'm a former PANYS student organizer. So I went to school at Hobart and William Smith in upstate New York. I don't believe they have a chapter anymore, but I got really interested in peace issues when I was an undergrad. I interned at Code Pink, and then I saw this opportunity. We had a PANYS chapter at my school, and the founder of it left. So I was like, this is pretty perfect. And I loved it. And I did it for my junior and senior year of college. And honestly, it really helped me to get to where I am today, and really allowed me to like find my passions. And so now currently Beyond the Bomb and Global Zero, I do a lot of like content writing and using other tools to raise awareness about the threat of nuclear weapons. So a lot of the examples I will use today are about nuclear weapons, but they're kind of applicable to a lot of the issues that you're working on your campus. So yeah, I'm excited to dive in just a second. Tips for remaining engaged through an online format. you will definitely be able to define what digital organizing is after this. So that's a great thing to want to learn. We're gonna talk about that in just a second. Encouraging folks at my college to engage digitally. Perfect. Cool. Well, if you haven't introduced yourself yet, please continue to do so in the chat, but I will start to get into the presentation. So just to start off, definitely like feel free to email me at any point after this if you want to learn more about digital organizing, or if you have any questions. I'll put in the chat my email address so you have that. Yeah, definitely reach out if you have any questions or want to learn more, or really if you have any questions about anything. So yeah, we're going to cover a lot in the next 50 minutes. So it is a lot, especially if you're a bit new to digital organizing or advocacy in general. So we will start off with talking a little bit about just writing for a digital audience, because it is a very specific kind of writing. And after that, I'm going to talk about two main things: storytelling and developing calls to action. And those two will really feed into how to use certain digital organizing tools. And I'm going to talk specifically about three kind of tactics to use, and that's using social media, writing blogs and op-eds, and utilizing email to let your audience know about a specific event or action. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about campaign strategy and how to relate that to digital organizing. So to start off, another thing to chat in the chat box about, so what do you think digital organizing is? It can just be a few words, a sentence, and if you don't know, just try your hand at it. Like, what do you think I mean by digital organizing? What do you think that means? If you could chat in, I'll give it a minute or so, people to chat in. Mobilizing people in a non-face-to-face way. Yep, absolutely. Alternative to in-person organizing, online organizing, social media organizing in the internet space. Absolutely. Using social media, online stuff to advocate or organize on social issues, using technology to organize, learning to work better in a digital fashion, creating internet accessible events. People have an online persona and realm and use it to spread messages, create community, taking advantage of new tools online, event planning, conscious of the current restrictions, involves technology to keep people safe. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I really like that last comment. Advocacy and outreach on online platforms and across wider geography, maybe because of reach of online platforms. And that's super important. And that's why digital organizing is so important, not only in this time, but even beforehand. And, you know, even if we're in a kind of new normal, whatever that looks like and whenever that may be. But that's why digital is so important, is because you can reach so many more people than you may be able to in person in your community. So yes, absolutely. You guys are already on track to knowing what digital organizing is. So I always say that digital organizing is field organizing. So I see all of you as basically like field organizers. You know, you're in your community, you're talking to the people in your community, you know your community best. And that means you are digital organizers as well, because field organizers must have those digital skills. So essentially every action or every event that you're putting on must be tied to those digital aspects, and vice versa. So if you are doing something on social media, or you're sending out an email, or you're really doing anything kind of in the online space, how is it tied to what you're doing on the ground and what is happening elsewhere? So everything must be tied together. So digital, like you all hit it right on the head, it's the online design aspects of it. So even when you are in person holding some kind of event, you need to have those digital aspects of it, like the visual aspects of what you're doing in person. How are you promoting this action or event? So how are you using social media? How are you writing about it? How are you sending emails? What kind of media aspects are you blogging about it? Are you writing an op-ed? So it's really any promotion of your campaign in an online aspect. So first, I'll talk a little bit about how writing and issue advocacy may differ a little bit from the writing you may be used to. So you may be used to kind of in some of your college classes writing these more like long form research papers, right? And to a certain extent, like those are absolutely helpful for the kind of like digital writing you'll be doing in a setting like at PSAC New York State. So you have this thesis and everything you're writing is around this one argument, right? No matter what you're arguing, you have all of these pieces of evidence and they all point to supporting your argument, right? And that's absolutely the case when you're doing any kind of content writing and like digital issue advocacy, except it's a little bit more simple, a little bit more straightforward, and you don't have to always provide all of those pieces of evidence that you provide in those like longer form research papers. So it's always connected to this theory of change. And what I mean by theory of change is what are your like long-term goals? What are your intermediate goals? What are your like short-term goals? So always connecting whatever kind of content writing you're doing to a goal of this organization. So for example, like Peace Action New York State, like what is some like short-term goals of Peace Action New York State? What are some long-term goals? Like what are they ultimately trying to achieve? So if it's something on like nuclear weapons, maybe the goal is for the nuclear ban treaty to enter into force or something like that. And so when you're writing about nuclear weapons, like how is that content writing, whether it's social media, whether it's email, whether it's like whatever kind of piece of writing, how is that connected to what the absolute goal is, right? It's always simple, always straightforward. Like I said, you start off with, even if it is like a short 280 character tweet, you need some kind of hook and you need to kind of lay out your argument a little bit. So like thinking of who is reading this kind of content and maybe they know absolutely nothing about what I'm talking about. So you really want to start with the basics, but you also want to get their attention with some kind of creative hook, as well as summarizing the points and the argument that you're laying out. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about storytelling in a few slides, but it essentially just means you need to tell a really interesting narrative that relates to kind of their everyday lives and relates to something they care about. So that it could be like stories of impact, it's human-centered, and it's personal, it's intersectional. So it relates to all of these different issues that your activists care about. So I'm going to be talking primarily about 3 types of content writing a little bit later in the presentation. So social media, email, and then like blog post or op-ed. So social media, I'm going to kind of dive into 3 platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook a little bit later. But like I said, it's simple, it's straightforward. But because like Twitter, for example, people really only see your tweet for like a few seconds max. Like it could be like 30 seconds maximum that you'll see, that they'll see it. So you really want it to be eye-catching. You need to have a really good hook. You need it to be creative. It just needs to be really straightforward so they know exactly what you're talking about. And like it depends on the character limits. Like Facebook and Instagram have a little bit longer character limit, whereas Twitter, sometimes it can be hard to kind of summarize everything you need to in a really short tweet. So that's why I say like make it really eye-catching. Email, you're able to email multiple people at once about an action or an event that you're doing. And the different thing with the email, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, is you want the ask to be one of the first things they see. And then blog post op-ed, that's kind of laid out a little bit like, your research papers might be, but it's definitely shorter. It's definitely like punchy, just like creative analysis of something, and always ending with a solution or a call to action. And I'll talk a little bit more about call to action in a few slides. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about storytelling in Salience. So what does that mean? So I took this quote. This is about nuclear weapons very specifically, but I think it's applicable to a lot of different issue areas. So this is from a Plowshares Fund report, which is an organization in the anti-nuclear field. So the threat of nuclear disaster, either intentional or accidental, is significant and growing. but the American public does not see the reduction of nuclear weapons as an urgent priority. On the contrary, nuclear weapons and the serious threat they pose to humanity rank exceptionally low on the public's list of concerns. Americans, in other words, do not give much thought to what is, for many, an unthinkable idea: nuclear disaster and its catastrophic consequences. So salience essentially means that it's just connected to what's happening, that it's an important issue that people think about daily, right? And right now, nuclear weapons isn't really that salient issue right now. And there's so many different things happening. So it's like how to like reframe this fight as something that really relates to people, and it's not like fear mongering. It's not making it this huge issue that we don't have control over, but it's making it an urgent threat that we actually have the power to fight. So again, I'll be using nuclear weapons as an example, but I think it's applicable to a lot of different national security and foreign policy issues. So kind of the first suggestion I have for any kind of writing that you'll do is getting past the problem to the solution. So people understandably associate a threat like nuclear weapons with just their inherent dangers, but they also need to associate the dangers of something like nuclear weapons with a way forward and a concrete solution. So we need to go beyond describing the problem and instead explain why this is an important issue and what kind of solutions we can provide that can improve certain outcomes. So we absolutely need to describe the problem, but I think something that the anti-nuclear field doesn't do enough of is getting beyond the problem. Like, we're analyzing the problem, we know it's a problem, we have all of the wonky analysis to prove it, but the thing that we don't do enough is like, this is urgent and this is solvable though. Like, we have ways forward and a way to combat this. So avoiding problem-based messaging, focus on solutions, seeing it as urgent and solvable. And the main reason for this is if people just hear over and over again that nuclear weapons are bad, they're like threatening the world, they're going to shut down. They're going to think that they're powerless. They don't have the power to do anything about it. So if we give them a little bit more like something concrete to do, then they're able to take action, and they think that they have a space to solve this. Using humor, I think that's something that Beyond the Bomb does really well, is essentially like illuminating a dark topic by lightening up. And it is something like nuclear weapons is obviously very serious, but there are ways to convey its importance while offering some like humor. You have to do it in kind of the right way to not be like inappropriate, of course, but you know, there's like some fun memes you can create, especially with like Trump right now. It's really easy to create stuff against him and the fact that he has sole authority over nuclear weapons, but there's ways to do it without being inappropriate, right? Two more on this slide. So I will probably say this a lot of times in the next 40 minutes, is knowing your audience. Communicating with like a Democratic member of Congress will be very different than communicating with an activist, with a national security expert, with a Republican member of Congress. Like, I know when I'm talking to my representative who is a Democrat, I might use the argument of like the Pentagon is spending billions and billions of dollars on nuclear weapons while we claim to not have enough money for COVID response, right? Like, I can definitely use that argument with a Democratic member of Congress. If I get a Republican member of Congress, I might not do that as much because they're not as concerned about like universal health care or whatever argument I may use with a Democratic member of Congress. Like, I might use something like, veterans healthcare or something. Like, I get to know that like Republican member of Congress, like what do they really care about, and how would I communicate with them to make them realize that this is an important issue. So getting to know your audience and then figuring out how your messaging differs between those audiences. Like, who are you trying to talk to? What do you want them to do? What do they value? Who are their influencers? So it's basically like power mapping these people and like, what do they care about? Who do they follow? Who are their influencers that maybe we can influence as well? How can you reach them? What issues do they really care about? And making it proximate. So making these issues current issues, especially something like nuclear weapons. I think a lot of people think it's just this gigantic problem that's kind of happening like over there. It's like happening to other people. Like, it's something that Trump and like other world leaders are arguing about. That doesn't necessarily affect us. So it is relating it to these like values like progress and equality and peace and justice. Messages that are personally meaningful for them will help them start a conversation. And then it will attract those who don't yet believe through like topics that matter most to them. So that's when I say like know your audience, like what kind of issues do they care about and how can we relate like these national security or foreign policy issues to them and like something that they already care about, then it can become relatable. So making this a salient issue, so shifting from awareness to action. So essentially getting people to act, you need to start with like starting with the belief that a statement is true. So it's elevating something from a fact that it's true. So starting with like a threat all the way to a cause and progress. So it happens to like their community. So it becomes like something that's happening to them. So starting with the threat, it's a belief that a statement is true. Concern is elevated by a sense of urgency, something that they continue to think about over and over again because it starts to matter to them. And then that becomes a cause when they start sharing it with others. So they're thinking about it every day, and then they start to talk to other people about it. And they finally have the confidence to own that message. And then progress. Progress is seen when they start to take action for the cause. So it's like sustained through like personal validation, getting progress towards that goal. So that's how like shifting from awareness to action. So it's starting with, they may not even think that something is true. They move to something that they now think is true. So like nuclear weapons are a threat. Like that's a belief, that's a statement that they think is true. And then it's elevated by a sense of urgency to something that happens to their community. And then they start to share that with their community as well. And then they start to take action. So how to do this? Because I know I've kind of talked about like the framework of like salience and storytelling, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can actually do this. So I've said this a little bit before, connecting with emotions. So appealing to their emotions, I say like show, don't tell. So don't necessarily like tell people like you should be afraid of this. It's how to appeal to their emotions. Something, again, like making it proximate. I'm going to say that a lot. Is something that they already care about. It's talking about like it's an emotional, like eliciting an emotional response. And I think an important part of this is who is like the hero of your story and who is like the enemy in the story, who's the villain. So who are you uplifting? Like who are the people that you're fighting for their story to be heard or to be like to be saved and to like uplift their voice in the midst of this? And then who's the one on the other side that's preventing this from happening? So I think really in messaging that can be a good kind of framework for that kind of storytelling and eliciting those emotions. So eliciting a reaction using a headline or like even in like a tweet, because it is like such a short piece of content, something that intrigues, something that appeals to your desire to protect your community, harnessing emotional intelligence. That's when I say of like this hero or this villain, encouraging people to take action against something that is unjust. It's really easy to galvanize people, or it's easier to galvanize people against something of like, this person is doing something bad, we have to combat that. And then again, referencing tangible human consequences, because that's essentially what we're here to do, right? It is about the people at the center of this issue. So it's always about uplifting those voices. So kind of 3 ways to connect with those emotions. Focusing on community is definitely more effective than making this like a global or personal issue, because it taps into your collective desire to protect those that you care about. Connecting through cultural relevancy. So what kind of like quips and like artistic images can you put on social media that really appeal to like the values that your target audience has? And also using something that people are kind of like used to in their daily lives. Like, is there like a show that's really popular in your target audience that you can somehow relate to your issue? So it's, again, going back to knowing your audience of like, what are the things that they're consuming? What are the things that they're following? How do you reach them where they're at? Like I find like, you know, a platform like TikTok might be better than something like Facebook to reach like Gen Z, for example, because maybe a lot of them aren't on Facebook. So maybe if I'm trying to reach them, I would use like a platform like TikTok instead of Facebook. So it's always thinking about who is your audience and how they're consuming this information. Keep it ownable, keeping the message simple, relatable, repeatable. Your audience can't own a message that they struggle to retell. And then invoke hope. So going back to like getting away from fear mongering, you can make this issue seem like urgent without like fueling this like resignation and just shutting people down because they feel like they can't do anything. Okay, so the next part of this, and feel free to chat in any questions or stop me at any time if you wanted to add anything or ask any questions, although I do have a few minutes at the end to ask questions, but feel free to chat in questions. I can bring up the chat as well. So the second part, I probably use this phrase a little bit, calls to action. So what does that mean? So I always say that whatever kind of content writing you do, you always want it tied to some kind of action or solution. So this is what we call a call to action. So this is like a concrete thing for your audience to do. So it's sign this petition, donate to this cause, call your member of Congress. So first, when you're creating this call to action, going back to a lot of what I've said before, create this powerful hook, make it really personal, use words that provoke some kind of emotion or enthusiasm, giving your audience a reason why they should take that desired action. So why is this important and why should they be taking this action? Always avoid that fear mongering. Sometimes it is really hard to do when you're talking about something like nuclear weapons to avoid this disaster talk, but you can convey that sense of urgency without like going kind of overboard and shutting people down. Use imperative or command verbs. So that's like sign this petition, you know, buy this, do this. So it's a direct command verb. I'll show you some examples on the next slide. Make room for new approaches. Like definitely the more creative you can be, the better. And especially like when I say use variety of platforms and tools and like measuring and tweaking, you want to kind of test out maybe like different language that you use on different platforms and see what people are taking action with. So like if you do post like a really creative tweet, like are people engaging with that and are they going to the action or not so much? Like do you have to kind of change around that language maybe? Or maybe you've posted so like you sent out an email and a lot of people are clicking on that and taking action from that. Like what did you do on that was a little bit different? And maybe how can you measure and tweak the other platforms to fit that a little bit more? So I always say it's like throwing a bunch of things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think being as creative as possible is really helpful on that because you get to test out a lot of different kind of language and just seeing what resonates with people. So I'm gonna have you develop your own call to action. So even like you don't have to like share it or anything. So I'm just gonna kind of give you like a few minutes to either in your head or I encourage you to even like write this down, developing your own call to action. And you can feel free to chat it in as well. I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And here are a few examples on this slide. And you can even expand upon any of these examples. These are just like really quick one sentence call to actions. So sign Beyond the Bombs No First Use petition to demand we take Trump's finger off the nuclear button. Like I can definitely expand that with another sentence to make it a little bit more personal, a little bit more creative. But people know like what they should do. They know why it's important because right now Trump has his finger on the nuclear button. It's really simple, really straightforward. People know what you want them to do. Donate to Beyond the Bomb to resist the threat of nuclear violence. Tweet at your member of Congress to stop an unnecessary and dangerous war with Iran. This last one I actually just saw in an email today. Call your member of Congress to demand they condemn Azerbaijan's attack on Nagorno-Karabakh. So that's like about the Armenia Azerbaijan conflict that's been breaking out. So I literally saw this in an email today. So something that's just like really straightforward that tells people what you want them to do and why it's important. Those are like the most two important aspects. And then you can expand upon it with like a sentence or two about why it's personal, and even getting a little bit more creative with it. So I'll just give you a minute or so to kind of develop your own call to action. Yeah, should we do these as breakout rooms, Emily?
Yeah, I think it could be fun. I'm just going to do them as random breakouts. So
Cool.
all will not be by campus. But yeah, let's do 5 rooms. So there should be about 5 or 6 of you per room. Yeah. Here we go.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, well, I hope that was helpful. I know my group rocked it and developed amazing calls to action. So yeah, I think that exercise was actually really great in the breakout rooms too. And yeah, so it's really just developing almost like an elevator pitch of something really quick of like, what do you want people to do? Why do you want them to do it? And then how do you kind of provide that way in for people who may not know a lot of information about what you're talking about? So using that knowledge of what we're talking about with storytelling and like salience of these issues, as well as developing calls to action, we're going to talk about specific tools and how to use what you just learned. So like I said, like kind of 3 different types of content writing I'll be talking about. So this first one, so it's really just writing any kind of like a little bit longer form than like social media, maybe even email. If you're writing some kind of op-ed or if you're writing a blog post, like I know Beyond the Bomb loves guest blog posts. If anybody is ever interested in that, definitely let me know because we love kind of guest blog posts, especially from students. So if you're writing a blog post like that, if you're writing some kind of opinion, or if you're writing a letter to the editor, that's also really important. Letters to the editor and representatives and members of Congress really read those. So it's really any kind of like public, like longer form writing. But how it differs from maybe the longer form writing that you're used to. So definitely keeping that word count like really, really kind of short is really important. Like definitely under 1,000 words for this kind of writing. It's like a short, punchy kind of analysis or like hot take. That always starts off, like I've said multiple times, just saying like something really interesting at the beginning, this interesting hook. Each paragraph you want to keep like relatively short, like 3 to 5 sentences, and then always looping back to the call to action, which you just worked on. So that's kind of like the general layout of like pieces like that, of like something really interesting that catches people's eye. What's like the summary of like the points that you're trying to summarize, providing different arguments or pieces of evidence, and then closing out with that solution. So I've kind of laid that out here, how that's divided up into the intro, the body, the closing, always circling back to that argument and connecting it to some kind of solution, some kind of call to action at the end. So I'm just going to show you, and I'm going to send around this, or we can send around this presentation after, so you can kind of click on these links, but I'll just like show you, I think like one of these. I'll do this one. Okay, you should be able to see this blog post. It was something actually I wrote like last year about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and just something that's like just kind of follows this general layout. So this like interesting hook, so exactly like, 76 years ago today, or 74 years ago today, this happened. The United States dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese of Hiroshima. But did you know that there are weapons in the US arsenal today that are significantly more powerful than the bombs dropped on Japan? And then I go through and I lay out the different kind of arguments, the different pieces of evidence. And then I ultimately wrap up with a call to action. So the call to action here was like sign the petition for no first use. Because I kind of lay out like why no first use is related to this argument and why it's so important. Like as we continue this fight, we always must remember the horror that happened in Japan, and keep in mind what a repeat of this with more powerful weapons could mean. This is why we need no first use, right? So there's a few other examples in there that you can kind of look at later. But the second part of, or the second piece of content that I'll talk about is email writing. So keeping the call to action ask as close to the beginning of the email as possible. Because when you're emailing like multiple people, like, I don't know about you, but I get like so many emails per day, and I can only really like scroll through it really quickly to see what they want me to do, what it's about, what I should click on. So that's why I say keep that call to action, like just right at the intro. Like you want to get to the point like really quickly. And especially when there's just so much information out there. We're all getting so many emails and like fundraising emails and like just so many different issue sets, whether it's on social media, email. So you want it to be as simple as possible for them to click on the thing that you want them to take action on. And I say with emails, even when you're emailing like a group of people, and maybe you're emailing your chapter, maybe you're kind of using like a mail merge or something like that to email a group of people. But even if like you're emailing like your chapter, whether it's 5 members, whether it's 100 members, you have to remember that there's a human on the other side of this email that will be reading this. So sometimes like I forget that when we're emailing these like, 50,000 people on our email list of like, there is like a real human that is reading this email on the other side of it. And so going back to always making it personal, just really knowing the people that you're talking to, what would get them to take this action. And then also would an average person know what you're really talking about if like without extra information. So especially with nuclear weapons where it can get kind of wonky, a lot of different acronyms. Like I stay away from those acronyms. I just stick to the basics. So I know that they know exactly what I'm talking about. This is an example of an email we've sent out at Beyond the Bombs. This is when Trump was threatening to resume nuclear testing a few months ago. It seems a really long time ago, even though it was only like 3 months ago. So yeah, we just kind of summed up what was happening. The Trump administration has just threatened to resume nuclear testing, take action immediately and sign our petition. We want that call to action as close to the top as possible. And we really tested out this, like, we need to be testing COVID, not nukes. And I think that really relates to like the average person in the US. Like what do they want right now? They want to be healthy. They want to like not get coronavirus. They want more testing. They want good healthcare. So how do we relate that to not testing nuclear weapons? Like we need to transfer this funding away from something that's completely awful. We never need to resume again, like nuclear testing, and we need to actually use those funds for something like coronavirus testing. So getting into social media, this is kind of the last part of kind of the content writing that I'll talk about. So I've said this a few times before. I'm reiterating a lot of different points just because a lot of these are super important. So always thinking like, what if your audience knows next to nothing about this topic you're posting about? And I know that can be really hard in something like a 280 character tweet, just kind of trying to sum up something really wonky in like foreign policy or national security. So like breaking it down in the like simplest ways possible. Like I said, not using acronyms, defining your terms, using quotes, like get to the heart of your argument, really important. And then also not only sharing like what is happening, like the general information, but what is your take on the information being shared? So if it is something like, the conflict in Yemen is killing innocent civilians, my take on the information is that the US needs to stop fueling the war in Yemen, right? So my take is that like the US needs to like take these actions and no longer give military funding to Saudi Arabia to continue this war on Yemen. So it's always kind of connected back to that like call to action, back to the solution, and back to like what your take is on this information. And then what do you want your followers to do when they see your post? So again, Like, is there something concrete they can do? Can they call their representative about something? Can they share something on social media? Can they watch something? Can they attend an event? Even if it's virtual, whether it's in person, like what can they feasibly like do to like take action on this issue? And I'm just going to skip over the examples for now because of time. So using your personal social media, I think this is super important. I know a lot of you kind of in the beginning said that like kind of making this like personal engagement in virtual times is really hard. And I do think social media is really important for getting around that, because I think you can, even though social media can be such an impersonal thing, I do think you can make it, you can use it to make really great connections. So definitely like share the work that you're doing like as an activist with Peace Action New York State. If you ever like write anything, like have you written like a letter to the editor, an article, or a blog post? Like your work isn't over yet once you've kind of written that. Like definitely like promote it, like put it on social media, send it to people, email it around. And then I'll talk a little bit more about using social media for networking and professional development, because I think like tools like Twitter are so important for that. So Twitter is personally like my like favorite social media platform for kind of networking and making this like really personal engagement. So you can really follow, engage with people in the space. And these are this is a bunch of lists of people on Twitter to follow. So like if you're interested in like nuclear weapons, if you're interested in like peace and security, these are a bunch of different lists of like people to follow. And again, you can access this presentation after and kind of go through some of these lists. But honestly, that's how I've made like so many connections and have talked to so many people is on Twitter. Believe it or not, it's a really great tool to actually like meet people, quote unquote. So Twitter is an interesting platform. Again, it's max of 280 characters. I use TweetDeck to kind of schedule out tweets as well. Get really creative with it. You know, you can take pictures, post like fun GIFs or memes, share articles, tag people that are like have written certain articles that you really like, really engage with them on like why you like that piece and like taking quotes from their piece, retweeting, liking them, like engaging with them on Twitter, tagging reporters who like read a certain piece that you're a fan of. I also really like Twitter DM groups. I think that's really a great way if you have like a group of activists that like on your college campus or whatnot, that you kind of want to galvanize around different actions. You can make a Twitter DM group and just like really easily send like tweets of like, hey, can everyone like retweet this? Everyone take action on this, etc. I'm gonna actually skip that just in the interest of time. So yeah, Facebook. How many people here on Facebook? You can feel free to chat in. I'm always just like interested in like, because I think a lot of people are starting to delete their Facebooks just because of data privacy, and like a lot of people just don't like the platform. So I'm always really curious how many people use Facebook. So while you chat in there, yeah, so you can definitely use Facebook to like share like blog posts, other work you're doing. I think the three best things about Facebook are really like Facebook groups, and that's kind of similar to like a Twitter DM where you can really galvanize people around like certain actions to take, doing Facebook events. I think that is really great for virtual events that you're probably all doing on Zoom. So I personally like really pay attention to Facebook events, and those are the kind of reminders to get on certain events too. And then Facebook Live, you can also like stream like directly from Zoom if you're having an event directly on Facebook, and that tends to get really good engagement. So I'm just scrolling through. I'm on Facebook, but wish I wasn't. Same. I feel like I have to be on Facebook for like family and other things, and I do not like Facebook as a platform. Yeah, mostly for Facebook Messenger, Facebook events and groups. Yeah, those are the best parts of Facebook. Staying in touch with family. Yeah. Or you can delete it and just have Messenger. Interesting. Maybe I'll try that at some point. And yes, I don't like the new update either. Cool. Well, that's really helpful for me to know. I think Facebook has certain redeemable qualities, and unfortunately, to like reach certain kinds of audiences, you unfortunately have to be using Facebook. So talk about Instagram. Instagram, I love. I think like so many people are on Facebook, especially like millennials and Gen Z. Like most of us are on Instagram. It's purely visual platform, as most of you probably know. I like for advocacy, I really like using it for like graphics and pictures from events, photography. Instagram stories are also really great for sharing different actions. Like I know from Beyond the Bombs Instagram account and my own, like I share a lot of other organizations' posts, and that seems to do really well for getting people to click and take action. The one thing about Instagram is you can't share links in your posts, so you have to put them in your bio. So you have to be like, you know, whatever caption you have, and then like referring them back to like to click on the link in your bio. And there is a neat tool called Link in Bio for like you can like put a bunch of different links in that link and then just put that one link in your bio. So like people click on that and then they're directed to a bunch of different links that they can take action on. So I know we only have a few minutes left. I just wanted to go through like campaign strategy. Yeah, Linktree is also a different one. There's a few different ones like Linktree, Link in Bio that are really good for Instagram. So campaign strategy. So I talked a little bit about this, and I think I've covered all of this, but I think the overall takeaway is like, no matter what you're doing, like whatever kind of digital action you're doing, whether you're putting together a petition, whether you're like writing an email to your like activist on your campus, sending any kind of tweet, doing any kind of writing, always think how that is connected to your long-term goals and your short-term goals. So like what do you like theoretically want to do in the next month and the next 6 months and the next year? How is this like one digital action I'm doing, how is that going to help us to reach that goal? And in the process, you're thinking about like, who are you targeting? Like, who are the ones that will be able to help you reach your goal? What are the metrics that you need to be successful? How are you framing it? How can you use storytelling, going back to that portion of the presentation tonight of like how you can make it proximate, how can you appeal to people's emotions? What are key events and moments coming up to take advantage of? Like, I know for Beyond the Bomb personally, like we're doing a lot with the election. I know Peace Action is as well, of really engaging voters on various issues and getting them to be major issues in the election. So always thinking of like what's coming up that I can really use to talk about my issue. And so these are kind of some key questions. Again, how is this connected? Like how is this one action connected to our campaign? How are we utilizing social media? How are we reaching a bigger audience? Is there some kind of like listserv that you can even use like on your campus? Like I know when I was on campus, I would try to access certain listservs to get like our events to like a wider audience. What digital actions or like even other actions do we want people to take? Calls to action, so always developing those calls to action. You guys rock that. How are you letting people know about whatever kind of action or event you're doing? What about visuals? Like, do you need some kind of collateral, like posters to put up? Are you like making some graphics for social media or email? How are you documenting what's happening? Like, even if you're in like a Zoom meeting, are there people like taking screenshots or like taking recording of it that you can share later? And then how are you following up with the people who do take that original action? And like, how are you following up with them to make sure that they're engaged? So I know that was a lot in 1 hour, but thanks so much for being here, and you're all rock stars. And I'm sure that you're all going to be really great in this coming year, even though it's a really tough year to be organizing. But I hope that was helpful, and I can definitely answer any questions you have, and I can definitely stay for a few minutes. I know it's kind of on the hour though. I will stop sharing. Stop sharing. Cool. Yeah, I can definitely answer any questions.
Right, and feel free to either unmute yourself or write it in the chat. Either way is fine.
Absolutely. Okay, I just have a question from Sarah in the chat regarding the hero villain narrative, how we frame the villain. Is it specifically framing US lawmakers who pass destructive policy or block good policy as the villain, or is it framing international actors as villains? I ask because I worry about the implications of framing nuanced international issues, so black and white. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it really is like whoever is, it doesn't even have to be like a person or an actor. It could just be like an idea as well. And it doesn't necessarily need to be like a black and white issue, but it's, people do tend to take action against something that is unjust. So especially with something like nuclear weapons, like I know I've framed it a lot as like, do we really want someone like Trump in control of our nuclear arsenal? No. But the problem also goes beyond that. So, but like Trump is a really great villain to use. But it doesn't always have to be like a specific person. It could be like an idea as well. And definitely like, it is really hard in these like international affairs. Like you definitely, it's a lot of people use like, you know, North Korea as this like eponymous like villain, and you don't want to do that obviously. And because there's not something so black and white that's like, this is good, this is bad. But you can use it as just like a framing for storytelling, even if you're not like explicit, like you don't explicitly say like, this is the bad guy, this is the good guy. It's just like a really good like frame to keep in mind, for people to take action against that is unjust. But yeah, let me know if that clarified that. Can add a little bit more. Besides Trump, who could we use as a villain? So I think as Sarah mentioned, so it could be like a policymaker who has blocked some kind of good policy, or is like trying to pass some kind of awful policy. I know I use like the military industrial complex as a villain a lot, of like the Pentagon and all these military contractors are literally profiting off of war and destruction. And they're a really easy villain to portray in these kind of situations. So yeah, even like policymakers, like you can even get outside that as well. Yeah, many isms and systems are villains. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Are there any other questions? Also, feel free to email me after this if you have any other questions that you come up with or
I have
want to
quick,
talk. Yeah.
is there like a way that we could, like, is there a person of contact if we have like an idea, like a call to action that we want to develop more? Is there like a specific contact like you or Desiree or Emily?
Yeah, I mean, definitely like email like me. I can definitely help to develop anything if you're working on something. Emily, I don't know if there's someone at Peace Action New York State that they should go to, but I'm also always available to help you develop anything.
Yes. Yeah, we're always here to help and provide those resources and look over things. So you can also always reach out to myself and Desiree. Yeah, on your weekly, or I guess they're bi-weekly now, check-in calls, one of the questions that we always ask is there anything that you need from the office? And one of those things you could ask for is something like that, like talking points or help looking things over. But Colleen is also an expert at it, so definitely use her as a resource.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions? I don't want to keep Colleen too long, but maybe if there's one last lingering one. Cool. Then I guess we can wrap up. Thank you again so much, Colleen, for this. Is she still here? Did she disappear? Colleen's there. Oh, you moved on my screen. I get very confused when people move in the bubbles.
Thank you.
But yeah, thank you so much, Colleen. This was incredible. Like I said, this was recorded. So if you missed it, or if you have like club members that would benefit from this, we can definitely share it with you. But yeah, thank you, everyone. It's really great to see all of your beautiful faces, or beautiful names. And yeah, really excited. So I hope this helps with everyone's digital organizing. I know I learned a few things, so I hope you did too. Bye. Have a
Thanks,
good night.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.